Good afternoon and welcome to Dialogue with Deidre. I'm your host, Deidre Malone. It has been about a week since I've been with you, and what has transpired over the past weekend is just something that I believe has America, and not just America, but a lot of foreign countries, foreign leaders as well, amazed, but specifically Americans, to just think about the tragedy that occurred in Charlottesville, Virginia on Saturday. I know that the alt-right neo-Nazis planned a rally and started that movement that Friday night, and then actually began that rally on Saturday, and then protesters for that rally were also there. And as a result of what I call a racist attempt to scare people into being fearful of the alt-right and the neo-Nazis, a lot of activity went on, and with that, the loss of life. We are sad to say that Heather Heyer was mowed over by one of the neo-Nazis that participated in the rally. And in Virginia, they are paying tribute to her, as we are here today, because of her ability to stand up to the racism that still exists in this country and the discrimination that still exists in this country. And so today in Charlottesville, they are having a memorial service for Ms. Heyer, and who was a paralegal, 32-year-old, who believed that minorities, gays and lesbians, that they should have all of the same rights in this country as white Americans. And so as a white American, she stood with other minorities and other white Americans of like mind to say, we're not going to just stand here and take your racist views. And so we pay tribute to her today. But let me just say, I don't know what to say about President Trump. The way he handled the very first news conference surrounding the tragedy in Charlotte, was appalling. The second news conference, he came back and a lot of us thought, okay, his speech writer did a heck of a job, but he still didn't call, the domestic terrorism that existed on Saturday, domestic terrorism, because that's what it is. He didn't have a problem talking about, when President Obama was president, all of the terrorism that existed in abroad, and saying that the president at the time did not acknowledge it. But at this point, domestic terrorism exists in our country, and the screen's black, Megan, he, didn't want to acknowledge it. So I just want to say that there's a lot of discussion right now going on in this country that deals with what happened on Saturday. You even have Republicans weighing in on the third news conference where President Trump was supposed to be talking about another topic, and then he just lit into that both sides were responsible, the neo-Nazis, the alt-right, and he called the protesters who were there to protest against the white nationalists. He said that they were at fault too. Eddie, roll that video so our viewers can hear a little bit of what our president had to say at the third news conference.
Feeling about your chief strategist?
Well, I think the driver of the car is a disgrace to himself, his family, and this country. And that is, you can call it terrorism, you can call it murder, you can call it whatever you want. I would just call it as the fastest one to come up with a good verdict. That's what I'd call it. Because there is a question. Is it murder? Is it terrorism? And then you get into legal semantics. The driver of the car is a murderer. And what he did was a horrible, horrible, inexcusable thing.
Can you tell us how you're feeling about your chief strategist, Mr. Bannon? Can you
Go
talk
ahead.
about that?
I would echo Maggie's question. Steve Bannon is.
I never spoke to Mr. Bannon about it.
Can you tell us broadly what do you still have confidence
Well,
in
we'll
Steve?
see. And look, I like Mr. Bannon. He's a friend of mine. But Mr. Bannon came on very late. You know that. I went through 17 senators, governors, and I won all the primaries. Mr. Bannon came on very much later than that. And I like him. He's a good man. He is not a racist. I can tell you that. He's a good person. He actually gets a very unfair press in that regard. But we'll see what happens with Mr. Bannon. But he's a good person, and I think the press treats him, frankly, very unfairly.
Do you have confidence? Senator McCain has called on you to defend your National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, against
I've
some of
already
these
done
attacks.
it. I did it the last time.
And he called on it again, linking the
Senator
tweet
McCain?
to the alt-right. And
Senator
saying
McCain, you mean the one who
yes.
voted against Obamacare?
And he said
Who
that
is Senator? You mean Senator McCain who voted against us getting good health care?
McCain said that the alt-right is behind these attacks, and he linked that same group to those who perpetrated the attack in Charlottesville.
Well, I don't know. I can't tell you. I'm sure Senator McCain must know what he's talking about. But when you say the alt-right, define alt-right to me. You define it. Go ahead.
Well, I'm saying, as
No,
Senator,
define it for me. Come on, let's go. Define
Senator
it for me.
McCain defined them as the same group.
Okay, what about the alt-left that came charging at him? Excuse me. What about the alt-left that came charging at the, as you say, the alt-right? Do they have any semblance of guilt?
This is Senator McCain's statement.
Let me ask you this. What about the fact they came charging with clubs in their hands, swinging clubs? Do they have any problem? I think they do. So, as far as I'm concerned, that was a horrible, horrible day. Wait a minute. I'm not finished. I'm not finished, fake news. That was a horrible day. I will tell you something. I watched those very closely, much more closely than you people watched it. And you have, you had a group on one side that was bad, and you had a group on the other side that was also very violent. And nobody wants to say that, but I'll say it right now. You had a group on the other side that came charging in without a permit, and they were very, very violent. Go ahead.
Do you think that what you call the alt-left is the same as neo-Nazis?
Those people, all of those people, excuse me, I've condemned neo-Nazis. I've condemned many different groups, but not all of those people were neo-Nazis, believe me. Not all of those people were white supremacists by any stretch. Those people were also there because they wanted to protest the taking down of a statue, Robert E. Lee. So, excuse me, and you take a look at some of the groups and you see, and you know it if you were honest reporters, which in many cases you're not, but many of those people were there to protest the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. So, this week it's Robert E. Lee. I noticed that Stonewall Jackson's coming down. I wonder, is it George Washington next week, and is it Thomas Jefferson the week after? You know, you really do have to ask yourself, where does it stop? But they were there to protest, excuse me, you take a look the night before, they were there to protest the taking down of the statue of Robert E. Lee. Infrastructure question, go ahead.
Should statues of Robert E. Lee stay up?
I would say that's up to a local town, community, or the federal government, depending on where it is located.
Are you against the Confederacy?
How concerned are you about race relations in America? And do you think things have gotten worse or better since you took office?
I think they've gotten better or the same. Look, they've been frayed for a long time, and you can ask President Obama about that because he'd make speeches about it. But I believe that the fact that I brought in, it will be soon, millions of jobs. You see where companies are moving back into our country. I think that's going to have a tremendous positive impact on race relations. We have companies coming back into our country. We have 2 car companies that just announced. We have Foxconn in Wisconsin just announced. We have many companies, I say, pouring back into the country. I think that's going to have a huge positive impact on race relations. You know why? It's jobs. What people want now, they want jobs. They want great jobs with good pay. And when they have that, you watch how race relations will be. And I'll tell you, we're spending a lot of money on the inner cities. We're fixing the inner cities. We're doing far more than anybody's done with respect to the inner cities. It's a priority for me, and it's very important.
Mr. President, are you putting what you're calling the alt-left and white supremacists on the same moral plane?
I'm not putting anybody on a moral plane. What I'm saying is this. You had a group on one side and you had a group on the other, and they came at each other with clubs, and it was vicious, and it was horrible, and it was a horrible thing to watch. But there is another side. There was a group on this side, you can call them the left, or you've just called them the left, that came violently attacking the other group. So you can say what you want, but that's the way it is.
On both sides, sir, you said there was hatred, there was violence on both sides.
Well, I do think there's blame. Yes, I think there's blame on both sides. You look at both sides. I think there's blame on both sides, and I have no doubt about it, and you don't have any doubt about it either. And if you reported it accurately, you would say.
Kill the person. Heather hired
Charlottesville. They showed up in Charlottesville
Excuse me.
to protest.
Excuse me. They didn't put themselves down as you, and you had some very bad people in that group. But you also had people that were very fine people on both sides. You had people in that group, excuse me, I saw the same pictures as you did. You had people in that group that were there to protest the taking down of, to them, a very, very important statue and the renaming of a park from Robert E. Lee to another name.
Robert E. Lee are not the same.
Well, no, George Washington was a slave owner. Was George Washington a slave owner? So will George Washington now lose his status? Are we going to take down, excuse me, are we going to take down statues to George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good. Are we going to take down the statue? Because he was a major slave owner. Now we're going to take down his statue. So you know what? It's fine. You're changing history, you're changing culture, and you had people, and I'm not talking about the neo-Nazis and the white nationalists, because they should be condemned totally. But you had many people in that group other than neo-Nazis and white nationalists, okay? And the press has treated them absolutely unfairly. Now, in the other group also, you had some fine people, but you also had troublemakers, and you see them come with the black outfits and with the helmets and with the baseball bats. You had a lot of bad people in the other group too.
Treated unfairly, sir. I'm sorry. I just didn't understand what you were saying. You were saying the press has treated white nationalists unfairly?
No.
I just didn't understand what you were saying.
No. There were people in that rally, and I looked the night before. If you look, there were people.
Interesting news conference. A couple of takeaways from that is this president needs a reality check. What do I mean by that? Good people on both sides. When he talks about the neo-Nazis, the white nationalists, the guys that are carrying the flags with the swastikas, I think he's insinuating, or he may even said it in the news conference, that there are those who just believe that the monuments are there for historical purposes, and that they're going to be standing there with the white nationalists because they're on the same side, but they don't have the same beliefs. That is what I think he is trying to say, which is absolutely ridiculous, okay? And then he goes on to say that there were bad people on the other side. Bad people who believe that racism shouldn't exist in this country. Those were the people on the other side, the ones that he was calling the alt-left, who were there standing in protest of the white nationalist, standing in protest of making sure that the monuments do come down. Now, what I found really interesting is that you have minorities who work in the administration, right? You have the Secretary of Transportation, who happens to be Elaine Chao, who is married to Senator who carries a lot of the president's water, Senator Mitch McConnell. And you have Secretary of HUD, Dr. Ben Carson. Where is he? Where is he weighing in? Omarosa, who works for the administration. These minorities, specifically these black folk who work for President Trump, where are they? Why are they not weighing in on this issue? I mean, quite frankly, he has no respect for them. It was something else that he said that that really just kind of stood out to me, and it dealt with, if we're talking about taking the statues down, like the ones that we have here in Memphis, which is the Nathan Bedford Forrest statue, and what's the other one? The Jefferson Davis statue. Are we going to take down statues of George Washington? How about Thomas Jefferson? What do you think of Thomas Jefferson? You like him? Okay, good, President Trump argued. Are we going to take down the statue because he was a major slave owner? Now we're going to take down his statue. So now what? It's fine. You're changing history. You're changing culture. No, we can't change history. History is in the past. History existed. Yes, they may have been slave owners, but here's the deal. It is a part of history that was oppressive, that disparaged and enslaved people of color, black people, that this country was built on their backs. And so if you are trying to heal a country, doesn't it make sense to remove those monuments of a period in this country where people were enslaved, where they were treated poorly, where, specifically across the South, thousands of black folk were lynched, right? Do we want to go to a park and have a nice picnic lunch with our family and have to look at these monuments? I know I don't. So if we're going to have this discussion, let's be honest about it. These monuments need to be moved. They need to come down. Where do they need to be moved to? Move them to the cemetery. Move them to a museum, but move them from our public parks. So, what are Republicans actually saying about President Trump? I can tell you one thing. If you look at the whole demeanor of his new chief of staff, right? Eddie Megan, put up that picture. The chief of staff, Jim Kelly, General Jim Kelly was standing there, and at some point he had to put his head down. I mean, it looked like he was just so, just couldn't believe what the president was saying. After the second news conference, where the speechwriter wrote these glowing things about how we need to come together and how he's against, white nationalists. After this third news conference, when you have David Duke and others coming back through Twitter saying, "Good job, Mr. President." You have Lindsey Graham, Senator Lindsey Graham, who's saying, "You need to be talking about healing this country. Mr. President, I encourage you to try to bring us together as a nation after this horrific event in Charlottesville. Your words are dividing Americans, not healing them." That is from one of the most conservative U.S. senators in this country, Lindsey Graham. That is what he's saying. Republicans across the board are rebuking what President Trump said. It is amazing that that his handlers can't do a better job of letting him know that you are embarrassing this country, you're embarrassing yourself, you're embarrassing your family, and I can't even imagine how his son-in-law and his daughter Ivanka, who actually now practices the Jewish faith, feels when they understand that white nationalists actually have no love for black people, they have no love for Jewish people, they have no love for gays and lesbians. And so wonder how she's feeling about her father continuously embracing this group of people. It is amazing. It is a sad time in this country, and our president is letting people know that I think, quite frankly, something is wrong with him. Something is clearly wrong with him. I don't know if he's unstable, if he is, has a mental imbalance. Clearly, you can't go from day one not acknowledging that these were neo-Nazis, white nationalists, who were having this rally, and then you're blaming that it's both sides. And then go to the next day where, after public outcry from the general public saying, what type of statement was that, Mr. President? Then your speechwriter comes back and writes something and makes you look really presidential. And then the next day you come back and it is something that is totally unscripted. But what Americans need to realize is the news conference on yesterday is the real Donald Trump. The real Donald Trump. And what does that mean for this country? That means that if you have never paid attention to a presidential election or your local elections, you need to pay attention now. Because if you think about what this administration is doing, trying to turn back all of the advances we've made in the last 8 years with the last president, challenging affirmative action. I had been out of town, but I read an article, an op-ed piece that Daphne McFerrin with the Hooks Institute wrote, who talked about the fact that, as a Harvard and I believe a Yale, Harvard undergrad and maybe Yale Law School or vice versa, she attended these schools, and one was law school, and she talked about affirmative action. People want to believe that affirmative action is just about people of color. When you think about affirmative action, specifically when you talk about admissions into college, a lot of the high-end donors who may make contributions to some of these colleges and universities, maybe their kids don't make the grade, so to speak. But they're allowed in, right? They're allowed in because their parents have made major contributions. So it's not just about people of color. And a lot of people of color, just like other folk, the majority in this country, make the grade and they're accepted in because they've made the grade and they're accepted in. I can tell you this, that this discussion will continue for a while. As most of you know that watch my show, I am the president of the NAACP Memphis branch here, and our organization just knows that this president is shown that he doesn't care about people of color. And we need to be vigilant, we need to be vocal, we need to let our senators and our congressmen know that we have concerns about the types of policies that are coming out of this administration. And it doesn't matter whether or not they're Republican or Democrat. You need to write them, you need to call them, you need to email them, you need to, if you still send letters through the mail, you need to do that because you need to be vocal about those things that you are concerned about. We are continuing to pray for the families that were affected by the rally in Charlottesville. The guy, I think he was 22 years old or 20 years old, that just kind of mowed through the crowd and injured and murdered Heather. Let's pray for those families because I know that they are going through a great deal at this time, and you have individuals who are out there really just trying to stand up against oppression and racism and the code. And the code, when I say the code, I mean when you hear people talk about we're going to make America great again, what do you think that means? I know what it means to me. It means that we want to go back to a time where minorities were oppressed, where minorities were controlled, where women didn't have the rights that they currently have today, where immigrants are looked at when they come to this country as they are immigrants, not just they're not Americans, but they're immigrants, where they can be discriminated against and treated poorly. Let me just say, America, in this country, European Americans, you're immigrants. The only Native Americans are the Native Americans who were in this country, right? So we can make America great again when we learn how to have a great deal of respect for each other, where we learn how to appreciate the differences between the races, and we work on an agenda that is going to be in the best interest of all of our country. That's how we make America great again. Not just looking out for the few, but for the whole. Let's transition real quick and talk a little bit about what's happening here in Memphis. Over the weekend, we saw that in front of the Nathan Bedford Forrest monument in downtown Memphis, there was a major rally that existed. A lot of people that I know were there, and then they marched down, I believe, Union Avenue, and subsequently we've now found out, and I think it was on today's Wednesday, it might have been Monday, that the Strickland administration is moving forward again with a request to the State Historical Commission to actually move the Nathan Bedford Forrest Monument as well as the Jefferson Davis. I just don't want to get my names wrong. That's the reason I'm looking for my notes. Jefferson Davis, I believe, Megan Monument. Yeah, Jefferson Davis Monument that's in Confederate Park. And so there's some people who believe that the city of Memphis should just move them, just violate the law and just move those monuments. But I believe that we need to work within the constraints of the law, and that what the administration is doing in terms of asking for permission to move those two monuments is the right thing to do. And if they're told no again, then I believe the city is well within their right to sue the state and get it done legally. Now, do we want to be renegade and just go ahead and knock them down and move them? I don't think that's the right way to go. Because if the goal is to be able to preserve them, to move them somewhere else, then maybe that's the direction that we should go in. My personal opinion, not anybody else's opinion but mine, but I'd love to hear what you think about that. It's big news. It's big news. I saw people who were on yesterday in front of the Jefferson Davis Monument in Confederate Park. And what really stood out to me as I was watching the news, that Gail Rose was saying, and everybody knows Gail Rose, she is a big-time philanthropist here in the city, that even someone was threatening her about her son's grave. Then I know, and that's just unfortunate. This is America. We should be able to say what we want to say and have that freedom to do so. But violence and vandalism is unacceptable. We also, and I don't know, Eddie, if we have this photograph of the Reverend, I think it was Reverend Mitchell, who was in Collierville on Monday, I believe, at Collierville High. And some students, a 13-year-old and a 14-year-old, white male students, sprayed, I think it was F nigga, on his Cadillac, sprayed it. So thank goodness for video. They captured that, and I believe that those young men are going to be in juvenile court, if not today, tomorrow. Parents, we have an obligation to teach our children that racism is unacceptable in this country, absolutely unacceptable in this country, and that what happened, the vandalism associated with Reverend Mitchell's vehicle, is emblematic of what I think those people who feel like minorities have advanced too far for their comfort level, okay? That's another way to try and put you back in your place. That's what the white nationalists think. They think minorities and immigrants in this country, and you have surpassed where you're supposed to be. And we want to just put you back in your place. You've taken our jobs. That's it. That's it. That is it. Vandalized the Reverend's car. It is unacceptable in this country, and I am so glad that those little hooligans were captured and will pay the price for that vandalism, because that's important. How do we move past this is what I want to have a dialogue with you about today. We have to continue having this discussion about race and racism in this country. We have to continue to talk about what President Trump, his views and his opinions, and quite frankly, one day you can say it was deplorable, it was disgusting what happened in Charlottesville, and then the next day you say that there are bad people on both sides. That's, in my opinion, that's a form of saying the racist behavior on the alt-right, white nationalist sides, and the Nazi side is okay. And Mr. President, it is not okay. It is not okay. It is not okay. And we have to continue to say that, right? I want to thank you. I normally take a break, and I guess I just went on because I just can't even believe that this is happening in our country, that this is happening in our city, and but I am glad about one thing, that people are upset about it. People are so upset about it, and they're talking about it. They're letting their elected officials know about it. They are protesting. They are marching. They are on TV. They are on social media, and they are letting their voices be heard. That is the only way, viewers, that we're going to be able to change this pathetic situation. That is the only way we're going to be able to continue to have a dialogue about race relations, racism in this country, and move the needle in a positive direction where at some point, probably won't happen in my lifetime, maybe my grandbaby's lifetime, it's not as big of an issue as it is today. I think about my forefathers who marched in the civil rights movement, relatives, folks who were lynched and died for the right to vote in this country, for their civil rights, for their ability to live in the neighborhoods that they want to live in, be able to go to the stores and the restaurants that they want to go to. People have died in this country. All right, specifically black folk. As we celebrate the NAACP Memphis branch's 100 years this year, and we think about how our branch was founded because of the lynching of L persons, right? 100 years ago, and we're still dealing with some of those issues. The lynching is just a different type of lynching, right? So I say to you, let's have this dialogue. Let's continue to have it. I so appreciate you watching Dialogue with Deidre. on the M1 TV network. Let us know what you think about this show. Let us know what types of topics you want to see on this show. But let me tell you, we're going to always keep it real on the M1 TV network. That's what we do. We don't hold back. We let it be known what we think, how we think, what we think affects our people, and how we think we need to change things. You're going to always hear that on our network, because that's who we are and that's what we do, and that's the reason that this network was created. So, thank you again for watching Dialogue with Deidre on the M1 TV network. We will see you on Monday, if not sooner. Have a great rest of your Wednesday.